As the hitting intensifies, it's 1-0 Montreal. On a power play for another 50 seconds. Richards trying to scoot in there alone. Halak way out of the net. It pinballs to the crease. Score! Mike Richards!
The Flyer captain is announcing his presence as the alpha male early in this one. Big hit. Sets up that cranker from Coburn, the defenseman joining the attack. They win a puck deep in their own zone. Hammerlick and the goaltender Halak collide. Oh, did they ever. And it's a tap in for Richards.
Everybody, it's Isaiah, and I'm here with Chef B, who's going to tell us about one of our sponsors here. Chef?
Yeah, O&B Puckcast is now brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. The winter months can be especially hard on our homes, from roof damage and peeling siding to frozen pipes and toilet overflows. Call Summit Public Adjusters before you call your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be stressful and confusing. Let Summit Public Adjusters take the stress out of the claim process by having our guys work for you. Get the most for your money and your repairs. The next time the big snow or the rain leaves you with some home damage, contact us for a free consultation. Summit Public Adjusters are licensed in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Learn more at summitpublicadjusters.com or call 215-752-0560. Just tell them that the chef sent you.
Yeah, what was that number again, Chef?
215-752-0560.
That's terrific. All right, we're going to carry on with the rest of our show. And we are back. It is Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 241. As the Flyers are surging in the last 12 games, they've gone from being a team that was, I guess, tied for last in the league, to now they're hanging on to a playoff spot, the wild card spot with a .540 winning percentage. They're 4-0-1 since our last show. They are 7-2-1 in their last 10. And we're going to talk about why this whole thing turned around. I think it's going to make up the crux of why we're here. Let's bring in the panel. And always to my left, Chef B, what's the good word for tonight?
Well, the good word is, before when we were talking, we were all asked together, we talked about how boring this team was. Can't say that anymore, that's for sure. They've put on some fun hockey, if nothing else. And they managed to win a couple games here and there. So looking forward to talking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And joining us, returning from his assignments and whatever he's got going on, it is the great Dan Silver. Great to have you back on the show. Dan, what's up?
Great to be back. You have very secret assignments. Can't really talk about those on the show, but I'm happy to be back and be hearing your guys' melodious voices and ready to talk some Flyers. And I know for sure about, why they're playing better. So, we can get into that too.
Awesome.
Keep us in suspense here. Well, we are brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com. And of course, Jim South Street, 400 South Street, 40 years of the best cheesesteaks and hoagies and fries in the grandest Philadelphia tradition. So get down there when you get a chance. Or if you live down there, by all means, use DoorDash, Uber Eats, whatever it takes to get that delicious food right to your door. Jim South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. And without any further ado, latest little news there. Helga Grans is back to Lehigh Valley. It appears like Sam Urson is going to be returning very soon, not necessarily Jamie Drysdale. And Dan, I want to start with you. First, I want to get your thoughts about what's been going on since we last spoke to you. And also, why don't we go right into the goaltending? Because if there's one factor that helped the Flyers turn things around. It's the disaster that the backup goaltending is now becoming a strength.
Yeah, and so first, I'll lead with, why we've solved the Flyers' issues, and it's clearly because I've stopped going to games. The first game I went to this year, they got shut out in the home opener by the Canucks. The second game I went to this year, they got shut out by the Bruins. The third game I went to, they were losing, getting shut out by Edmonton in the third period. And I sent a tweet out. I knew what the reaction was going to be, but I sent a tweet out saying, like, this is unbelievable. The Flyers get shut out every time I come and watch them play. And of course, I had 100 people immediately respond, stop going to games, you're the problem, all this stuff. They did end up scoring a few goals in that Edmonton game, but we're going to really test it because I'm going to go see Anaheim in January. And if they can't score a goal or beat them at home, then it'll be really disappointing. But in all seriousness, it is really fun to have a team now that we can kind of enjoy watching, at least of late. I think they've won 8 out of the last 12 games. Isaiah, as you mentioned, they're currently by points are in a wild card spot. I think by points percentage, they're not quite in that wild card spot. But it is, and it's funny, if Ursen's back, it's really going to start a dilemma with the goaltenders. But it is absolutely great to see as my cat is literally dragging a package across the floor. So
nobody's going to steal anything from your house.
After I answer this question, I'm going to take it away from her because I don't know if you guys can hear that or not. But anyway, the goaltending. I mean, Fedotov started off the year not very good. Kolosov was not great at the start. And now both of these guys have been fantastic. The Flyers give out and I want to get into this later, but they give out their, player of the game internally after they win a game. And Fedotov won it 2 games back for the win against the Rangers. And Kolosov won it basically for the Blues game. So now we've got this strength. We've got 2 good Russian goaltenders, very differing styles, but it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when Ursen comes back. And I don't know, Isaiah, if you want to get into that now or whenever, but the
Sure.
Goaltending definitely has been a strength. I think the goaltending and Emil Andrae, how kind of forceful and aggressive and take charge he's been on the blue line, have been 2 really big reasons why this team is playing better, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I mean, I kind of sum it up. If you think about the shows when we were talking about they're in last place, and Chef, we talked about what were the reasons behind this. If you look at last season, they never solved a lot of those problems. The center play was horrible since Couturier was hurt, and his play really diminished down to nothing. The core 4 on defense of York, Sanheim, Walker, Sealer was never really patched up when Walker was traded and Sealer got hurt. And then, of course, Ursen couldn't handle the number 1 job because he was being overplayed because, Cal Peterson and Sandstrom couldn't handle those minutes. And we went into this year not really solving any of those problems. And all of a sudden, Emil Andrae happened, Ristolainen stepped up. So now your core 4 is Sealer's been kind of, demoted down to like a 5th defenseman. That's fine. And because Ristolainen and Andrae have more talent. And then you still have York and Sanheim. York's kind of getting back into shape after an injury. And Dan just talked about the goaltending. And Couturier, touch wood for now, is hanging in there and approximately doing what he did last season. And of course, that's very contingent upon what kind of minutes he's going to be getting and how they need to be managed, because that's certainly an area for improvement still. Yeah.
Wow. There's a lot there, but there's a lot different. Well, that's good. I mean, the good thing is where the improvement happened is where you wanted it to happen, right? I mean, if you look at it, the goaltending got better and they were the weaker parts, right? Like we talked about, there wasn't a backup goalie that Ursen could lean on in the home stretch last season. Mm-hmm. The players that we traded away or got hurt at the end of the season, they weren't really when they were replaced. Either the players weren't, in my mind, either ready or they weren't adjusted it right. Now this year, it seems to be like like I remember Dan saying almost probably 4 years ago on this podcast that these prospects that we had at that time needed to take that next step up. That was 4 years ago, and it looks like okay, we're getting it. Even Granz looked pretty good. I mean, he didn't look out of place. He looked like he got burned a little bit. Not that's going to happen, but same thing happened to Andrae when he came up, and so I'm pleasantly surprised at how the defense kind of pulled together and has been playing actually pretty well. I mean, they didn't what. How long did it take to get a shot on goal the other night? I mean, it was literally like 13 minutes through the period. So I can't complain. The stuff that needed to get better got better, and the stuff that needed to maintain so you didn't take that regression, it stayed the same. I wish we could get some more scoring out of Farabee and Tippett, though, and possibly Frost. I think that would solve a lot of this team's problem. We could get them guys going. Farabee's been sniffing. And he's like averaging like 3.5 shots a goal a game the last like 5 games, and he just can't find a net.
Yeah, it's definitely snake bitten. Let's drill down, Dan, a little bit more on the core forward of defense, because I know Emil Andrae has been someone you've really thought had a future with the team, and he would bypass some of the other contenders to that top 4 spot. And I think it came faster than all of us thought. And to see Ristolainen bounce back and kind of take even what he was doing when he was improving a couple of years ago and take it to even a further level. There's a lot going on there, but they do have that core 4 in place that they had at the end, before the trade deadline last year.
Yeah, Emil Andrae takes me back to when I was a kid and I would listen to G Cobb on WIP. He would do this segment on his show, which guy has it and who doesn't have it, right? And it's sort of this
right.
Like you can sort of drill down on like what it is, but like Emil Andrae has it, right? And maybe it comes down to sort of the way that he takes charge on the ice or his aggressiveness. And then I look at a guy like Jamie Drysdale and I say to myself, he does not have it. Like I look at a guy like Morgan Frost, and in general, I'm like, even though I like him as a player and his skill, he does not have it. Maybe it comes down to aggressiveness and,
that dog.
What'd you say, Isaiah?
That dog in you,
Yeah, he's, that dog in you, you just are going to compete, right? And Emil Andrae, he has that. And you've been able to kind of see that from the start. It takes a while for defensemen to really develop. And he's a guy who, you'd throw him in there, and we've seen the last few years he could get taken advantage of defensively at times, and he kind of would look a little bit tentative offensively. Man, him and Travis Sanheim have really been take charge offensive players when they've been in the lineup, when Andre's been in the lineup the last month, and it's really turned things around. I mean, the power play needed a take charge defenseman to be that guy at the point, and Andrae certainly looks like he can be that guy. He really does look like he's got a very bright NHL future. And you combine that with Travis Sanheim, who probably Wednesday night will get named to the Canadian team for the Four Nations tournament or whatever it's called.
Four Nations. That's
he'll probably get
him
named
and
that.
TK.
He's really, Sanheim has really blossomed this year. And he's a guy, by the way, I think I've always kind of talked about Sanheim as a guy who still has more and more potential. Like even last year when he started out so good, it's like there's another level, and we're finally starting to see it. And it can take a while with defensemen. But when you look at Sanheim and Andrae, and then you look at what, Ristolainen has been really good most of the season, and especially recently. I mean, when they got Ristolainen, he was kind of like, didn't really know what kind of style he was playing. He didn't know if he wanted to be offensive or defensive. So they basically had him focus on the defensive part of his game, right? And they kind of turned him into a pretty reliable defensive defenseman. Now this year, Ristolainen has added, he's basically taken that base of defense that they imprinted upon him, and now he's expanded into the offensive zone more. So you've got him, Sanheim, Andrae, Cam York, is still kind of figuring out who he is in the NHL, but he's been a lot better. So those 4 guys really have been very good. And then it makes you wonder, where does a guy like Jamie Drysdale fit in when he comes back? If he's not going to be that top power play unit guy, and he still has things to figure out. And so, but that top 4 really has helped solidify things for this team, Isaiah.
Yeah, absolutely, Chef.
So Dan, the 2 things with Ristolainen, you could say that his awareness and the style that he was playing before, a lot of the times he would make a huge check. He was like playing a Hulk smash defense. You know what I mean? Like he would bury the guy in the corner, but then he would take himself out of the play, or he wouldn't be in the proper. I think using his stick more and his length and his legs, he's beating players to the puck and he's poke checking better. I think that could be a part of it too. Now he pokes something away from somebody instead of burying under the boards, and he's creating a turnover and turning the play the other way. I think that could be part of it too. And also, I had somebody like message me asking, and I thought it was an interesting question, and Dan will probably know more. Do you think that Emil Andrae got more development than Jamie Drysdale did? Because I thought that was an interesting thing, because he got thrown right in, and then he got hurt, and then.
Yeah, I think that Andrae has had more time to marinate in the AHL. Keep in mind, Andrae also, marinated in the Swedish professional league, for some time. But I still think what I'm talking about in terms of I don't think that's something that you develop. I think you either have it or you don't. And I'm just not sure watching Drysdale that he has it, right?
Yeah.
Because even when you're kind of like that sort of offensive defenseman who doesn't get involved, like a Quinn Hughes type or a Cale Makar type, you watch those guys play, and they are still up on their skates. They are making aggressive plays. They're not physical necessarily, but the way that they play has some physical aggression in the way that they manage the puck. And I still have just never seen that from Jamie Drysdale. So that's just kind of what I mean. But I think it certainly helps that Andrae has had as much development time in the SHL and the AHL that he's had.
But let me interject here, because one of the things, you could make a parallel between what Sanheim looked like at Drysdale's age, right? And they coached him and they challenged Sanheim to the point where he's at right now. And it took a long time. I certainly hope it wouldn't, if it's even possible for Drysdale, I'm hoping it wouldn't take that long. But this is why I'm a little bit more sanguine on the chances of Drysdale getting a little bit more of that dog in him, because they certainly did not see any of that in Sanheim for years, right? And just like Tortorella said a couple of days ago, he was just a guy that can skate, or a couple of years ago, he's just a guy that can skate. And now, since that trade that didn't happen in St. Louis, he's been a different player. I think he ran out of gas last year, kind of like 2/3 of the way through. But I think this year we're seeing a continuation of those improvements, and maybe, and our fingers are crossed, that Drysdale could have the same kind of, cross the Rubicon, if you will, in a very similar manner in a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I'm just thinking back. If you'd asked me about Travis Sanheim 3 years ago, I would have said that there was a lot of untapped potential there, but he certainly didn't show the kind of aggression offensively that he sort of is showing now. So maybe I would have said back then, oh, Sanheim doesn't have it, right? So people do grow, right, as players, as individuals. So, obviously I wouldn't give up on Drysdale. I just think based on what I've seen so far, I'm not sure. Also, he's just always, what's a really good thing about Travis Sanheim, which goes back to in the juniors and basically his entire career, he's not injury prone, right? Phil Myers, always injury prone. There's some guys that just for whatever reason don't get injured all that much. And I'm knocking on wood, but like Travis Sanheim, for whatever reason, genetics, who knows, just doesn't get injured all that much, right? So that's kind of a nice thing for him. And the thing with Drysdale is that he's just spent so much time injured, and it's hard to build any momentum like that. And he's kind of like so lightly framed that I worry that could be something that kind of follows him around.
Yep, I could see that. That is certainly a mitigating factor in my attempt to make a rationale in favor of Jamie Drysdale. But let's move on to Sean Couturier. I was looking at his average time on ice this year, and it's 18-17, which it's probably top among their centers. It is, and but I don't know how long he can keep this up, and I think it's a really important factor in their attempt to maintain the position that they're in as a playoff contender. And as Keith Jones said in an interview in the Inquirer a couple of days ago, they don't intend on going back. They're not sliding back. They're not going to silently tank or anything. They want to keep moving this thing forward, and they're going to need him, or they're going to need to make some kind of deal. We could get into that a little bit later, because right now trade talk is all the rage because of some deals have already gone down. But Sean Couturier is somebody the Flyers are very dependent upon, because he takes, if anything, even if he's not producing a ton of offense, he's taking up some really hard minutes against the opposition's best players. Chef?
Yeah. I mean, it's something to have to be concerned with, because, and you know, it's going to sound like, I know it's going to sound like we're singling out Sean Couturier, but he's the captain. He's the captain. He leads the team, and you kind of want to lead by example. But well, look at last year. It wasn't just him. Everybody broke down. Everybody got tired. Everybody fizzled out pretty much at the same time last year. And you wonder if it's because of, you know, the style of play that they were playing. They just get burned out. It happens. You know, and then that's why I wasn't overly critical about Michkov sitting for 2 games, because here's somebody who's never played more than 53 or 56 games in a season, and we're jumping right to 82. And we know what happened to the pro athletes last year during the 82. They all fizzled out because they were beat up because of this style of game that they're playing here. So, yeah, I mean, to me, I would like to see, I guess, better pacing on the games. They're trading too many free, you know, wicked, you know, free for alls. Yeah, it's just going back and forth too much. I mean, I just would like to see them settle in, control a game from start to finish a little bit more, at least 70% of the game, 60-70% of the game, have control over it, because they're still chasing a lot, which is not good either. I mean, they were managed the last couple of games, managed to keep the teams to the outside, which is the kind of game you wanted to play. And I think everybody looked pretty fresh after the game when you see their interviews and all. But they need to discover what it takes to get to all 80, because I get the feeling that if you can get to all 80 without fizzling out, knock on wood, like we said, if they make the playoffs, you know, which is ridiculous to even say, but if they do, at least you can hit that second gear when you have to.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at the games, the 5 games that they played since we last recorded, we had the Flyers at the quarter pole with Jordan Hall. Check that out if you get a chance. There's a lot of good points that Jordan made that I think you'll be very interested in. The Flyers beat Chicago in overtime, 3-2. Kind of a nip and tuck game. The Flyers deserved to win that game. Probably should not have gone to overtime. And then, of course, the frustrating loss to Vegas, where they played well, deserved better, but the experienced squad came through, and Vegas showed their championship medal and squeezed it out in a shootout. And then that almost disaster, which the Flyers just stole the game, very similar to Ottawa earlier in the year, when it was completely outplayed, and they hung in there. And then, of course, they get the overtime victory, and that put them right at 500. Then they beat the Rangers in probably their best performance of the year in the Black Friday game, 3-1. And then the next night, they go their 4th game in six days. They beat St. Louis in overtime, and played fairly well. I thought they really deserved to win that game, and they got a little tired, as you would expect in the third period, and survived quite a challenge from the Blues, and then in overtime. There's Travis Konechny making a fantastic play that sprung Matvei Michkov, who scored his third overtime game winner. And he is, I'll put this little stat out there. He is only the fourth teenager in NHL history to have 3 overtime game winners, and he did it in 23 games. So it took Sidney Crosby 69 games, Ilya Kovalchuk 100 games, and Rick Nash 119 games. So just kind of summing up what's going on. Dan, any thoughts about kind of those games, some things that stuck out to you, because it was kind of like up and down?
Yeah, it was kind of like, the last 2 games were so impressive. The Nashville game, they're just finding ways to kind of win, which is nice. It was nice seeing Morgan Frost with that deflection right at the end of the Nashville game. I was really cheering that one. He's had a tough time. He's probably not going to be with this franchise past this season, would be my guess, unless he kind of like really takes off the rest of this year. But it was really nice seeing him score that goal. It was a great deflection, and then getting the goal in overtime. My favorite moment from the past few games, and it wasn't even during the game, it was after the win, after the last win against the Blues, was Ivan Fedotov. After the game, he'd been named the best player of the game for the Rangers game, and so he gets to give out the heavyweight belt that they give to the guy who he decides was the best player in the game. So he gives it to Michkov, and there's video of this on Twitter. But Michkov says, and his English, it was also good seeing that he has a little bit of English. He basically said, good game, thank you, but TK was very good, but Kolosov, you deserve this. You are the best player. Koli, you are the best. And he walks over and he gives the belt to Kolosov, which I thought was so nice because, we had all these scouts, including Grant McCagg from Montreal, who were basically character assassinating Michkov. I don't know if it was to try and, calm their fan base down and that they passed over him for David Reinbacher. But, these things that they were saying about Michkov, he doesn't get along with his teammates. He's a selfish player. Clearly none of this stuff has any merit. And Charlie O'Connor, I tweeted this out, and Charlie O'Connor responded, and he said, the reality is that if Michkov was Canadian, these guys would probably be saying that it's a positive trait, right? Like Nathan McKinnon is super competitive, doesn't let his teammates eat certain things at times, but he's a Stanley Cup winning captain, Canadian. And Michkov, I've seen no signs that this guy is selfish. Like first of all, he's a great passer. All his interviews, he kind of like gives praise to other people. He gave the player of the game to Kolosov. So that was kind of like really nice for me to see. He gets it, and the team's playing very well. The Rangers game they came out so strong in that Rangers game. And we spent a lot of time talking about the defensemen and the goalies, but like Bobby Brink, man, he's really been playing well the last few games. Tyson Forster's looked a lot better. And it's just been a lot of fun to watch. But the moment after that game, and fans can watch it on the Flyers Twitter, I retweeted it too, was just a nice moment for me because they have spent a lot of time really trying to build out a locker room that fosters togetherness, and I think they've done a good job of it. And Michkov clearly is a good addition to that group.
Right. Yeah. That is the one thing coming into this year. You're hoping if they could, fill in some of those holes from last year, as referred to earlier, then you're adding Michkov into the bargain. You should see an improvement in the power play, which you have. It's been slumping a little bit lately. Then you add that to the PK, and things start making sense in terms of if you want to advance, like I referred to the Keith Jones interview earlier. Chef, you got something to add there?
I was going to say almost the same thing, so don't worry about it.
So the other part of this equation is the speculation about what's going to happen with the roster. I talked earlier about Helge Grans and him being loaned back to the AHL, and how it's really just to make way for Sam Urson Drysdale's not ready quite yet, but they have these decisions that are looming with the roster. And this kind of leads us to the discussion about the 3 goaltenders. At some point, like we talked about earlier, they're going to have to make a decision. And there's a lot of pundits that think that, well, if you tell Kolosov that he has to go back to the AHL, he's going to say "niet" and go back to Belarus. I don't know if I buy that if that were the circumstance. The thing with Fedotov is if he's outplayed, it is kind of vexing. Like, and the other thing that bothers me here, maybe more than anything else, these groin injuries with a goaltender, they usually take like 6 to 8 weeks to heal if you're not requiring surgery. And I'm thinking, is this going to be the kind of like they're going to be in this musical chairs and goal all year simply because they're not giving Urson a chance to heal? And nobody doubts it. He's number one. Tortorella declared it today. So, Dan, you want to take a crack at that conundrum that's more of a positive right now, but going forward, it's going to be an issue.
I've thought about this. This is a tough one. I wonder if they're going to keep 3 goalies around for a while and a lot of it depends on things that we don't know the answers to, right? Like you just speculated that if they send Kolosov back down to the AHL, that he's going to balk and say, okay, I want to go back to Russia. I don't know. Maybe the time that he spent with the Flyers has changed his opinion a little bit. And maybe they talk to him and say, look, Fedotov is not our Fedotov is 28, 29 years old. Like he's not our long-term here. If you can just wait it out until next season or something like that, like we'll make it work. I do wonder if something like that could happen and that Kolosov now might be amenable to going down to the AHL. I don't know the answer to that. Fedotov, again, Fedotov's older. He's 28, 29 years old. I wonder if they're going to try and trade one of these guys. I like both of them a lot. And Fedotov seems like he's gotten very friendly with Michkov and a lot of guys on the team. I don't want to see either of these guys go. I like these players, and I think that they could both be pretty good goalies. The ideal scenario is if Kolosov would be okay with going down to the AHL, right? Fedotov is not waivers exempt. You put him on waivers, someone is going to take that guy.
Yeah.
Kolosov is waivers exempt, so you could send him down to the AHL and no one can claim him. So that would be the ideal. So I think they need to figure out, and they probably already have, look, is this guy still upset, like, if he has to go to the AHL? So I think they need to figure that out. Short of that, I'm thinking they might carry 3 goaltenders until they can come up with some resolution. But I wonder what you could, maybe you can get a second round pick for Fedotov, a late second round pick. I don't know. Like, does a team like the LA Kings, are they interested in adding a goalie like Ivan Fedotov, right? There's got to be some teams that might be interested in taking a shot on him. So that would be where I would potentially be looking. First, I'd see if maybe Kolosov's okay with going down to the AHL. I do think that Kolosov is ultimately going to be a better NHL goalie than Fedotov. And he's got more runway. He's only 23, 24 years old. He's more athletic than Fedotov. So, that would be my first thing. See if Kolosov will go down. If Kolosov says, no, I don't want to play in the AHL, I don't know what you do. Then you try and trade Kolosov, I guess.
I just can't see, having bonded with the team at this point, that and knowing that you have a starter with a groin injury, and at the drop of a hat, he could be called upon. And then you have Makiniemi, who's injured at the AHL level. So, like Martinez always says, you have goaltending depth until you don't. And all of a sudden, the Flyers could have a dearth of players. Your starter's already injured. So I would talk to the agent. You're dealing with Dan Milstein. He's an experienced guy. And I think the way the situation is played out, I think they would be more amenable to it, especially if people stay healthy and Kolosov plays well enough and they think he could outplay Fedotov toward the end of the season, then Fedotov becomes a trade chip at trade deadline time, and then it makes more sense. That way you could see yourself, getting through this situation without exposing yourself to having no goaltending, and what that looked like toward the end of last year, Chef.
Yep. Well, and think about it. In this day and age, it was probably Jason Martinez that brought up because you need 3 goalies anymore. It might even be Russ Cohen that said it too. You need 3 goalies to get through a season, and they all need to be NHL-worthy goalies. They can't be just. I mean, think about it. If we trade away Fedotov now, and something happens to Urson, or Cal Peterson's your backup, and who do you have in Reading that's going to play on the Phantoms? I mean, at least here, if you play your cards right, it's like you'll be up and down. You'll get your 15, 20 more games this season. I think you might, just based on workload and because of this compressed schedule. I mean, Jesus. I mean, they had four games in 6 days. That's going to happen, I think, 1 or 2 more times at least this season. You got the Nations Cup coming up too. So after that, everything's going to be crunch time. You're going to need that third guy. I think if they explain this to him, say, look, you're going to go down to the AHL, the Phantoms, but you're going to get 5 games to 1 while you're down there. Cal Peterson is effectively on the bench until you need to do it when you have a back-to-back somewhere and you're traveling on a freaking bus, or you know what I mean. So
that's what he wants to avoid. I don't think.
I know.
Part of it
he wants to avoid it, though.
Right. I know that he wasn't starting, and that was what, to me, it's the styling and profiling part of it. It's like, I'm in the NHL. I think to me yeah.
Well, you know what? That's where you got to swallow your pride a bit, and because you'll get there. You're eventually going to get there. I think overall he's probably got more potential than Fedotov and Urson. I mean, I could see that he's got more flash. I don't know. You just got to hang in there, because I think part about if we're talking about this room, and nothing will kill a room faster than some jerk off who's me, and doesn't think of the team first, and that could sour a room if he comes in there going, I don't want to play anywhere but the NHL, blah blah blah. Even after a great thing that Michkov did for him the other night, gave him the belt. I just think that could sour the room. And I think he's a smart enough kid to know, okay, if I play ball here, I'm going to be the starter in a year or two. If, probably not, I would say 85% that.
Yeah, I don't know if he's going to surpass Urson. I know the organization looks to Zafragin as really the next one after Urson. Dan, you want to come in there?
Yeah, no, I was just going to respond to that. I mean, I don't think Kolosov would be the starter over Urson, but I do still think there's some question as to Urson's ultimate upside. So I think you could certainly be potentially looking at like a 1-1A type of scenario. And I love Kolosov's upside. I mean, he's just so athletic that I don't think they would say to him, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that you're going to be the starter in a year and a half, right? Because I think they love Urson. I think Zafragin is the guy that in 4 years from now, they're probably looking at as like, man, this kid can be one of the best goalies in the NHL. But yeah, if I'm Kolosov, I mean, he'll get paid, right? I mean, if he plays out his current contract with the Flyers and they want to keep him around, like he'll get a paid jump, probably more than he would make playing in Russia. So yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense what Chef is saying about how I'm sure he's a smart kid. He doesn't want to disrupt the chemistry. And now the Flyers have sort of played ball with him. They brought him over, they've got him with the Flyers. So I think there's some good things. I think there'll be a decent resolution on this. I guess the one interesting thing is, so let's say that they do convince him to stay. Fedotov is under contract for next year also, and he makes a lot. I mean, he's making $3.275 million. So that's the question, is what are you going to do with Fedotov if you decide you're going to keep Kolosov around for next year? You're going to try and trade Fedotov?
Well, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, if you listen to Elliot Friedman, he'll say there's a lot of teams that want goaltenders right now. And I'm thinking it's a decision I would put off until the trade deadline. And then it could probably sneak through, because I don't know how ambitious they would be once they're in the playoffs. So of course they want to try to do their best, but they're going to be realistic. But I would not do anything with the goaltenders until I got to that trade deadline. It's too risky, like I said. And McAniemi's hurt, and I think that's a pretty serious injury too. So
well, all three goalies are signed to the end of next year, and then nothing. So I don't know what the timeline for Zvragin is, but you definitely have a gap, and you definitely going to have to address this sometime next year. So there's a lot of decisions on the goalie front to be made. Maybe not right now, like Isaiah said, but definitely you're going to have to think of something at the trade deadline, and you're going to have to think of something in the offseason too.
Right. And you know what? An injury could change the whole picture. So
Yep.
Always keep that in mind. We've already experienced that. So just some numbers here for people like this. Since Sam Urson last played, Ivan Fedotov is 3-1-1 with a 2.91 ERA and 901 save percentage. And then Alexei Kolosov, 3-1, 2.25 with a 913 save percentage, doing a little bit better. Fedotov had a little further to go in terms of his technique and things like that. And based on what he was able to do in that, Ranger game, that was very impressive. So both are coming off their best performances. They're both ascending. So if we don't talk about trades tonight, the fans are going to kill us. So we got to talk about this Jiricek thing. And there is such a divide on what the narrative is in terms of why the Flyers could not beat the offer of Damon Hunt, kind of like a B prospect. I'll defer to Dan. A 2025 first-round pick from Minnesota, one of the better teams in the league, a 2027 second-round pick, and in 2026, Minnesota gives up a third and a fourth. And Minnesota, the Wild get David Jiricek, who is number 6 overall in 22, and also get a 2025 fifth-round pick. So let me lay out the narratives, and Dan, I'm going to hit you first because I know you know this player very well. Okay, Columbus wanted more for an in-division player than they would if they traded him out of conference. That's explanation number one, because Flyers clearly had the assets. The Flyers did not want to give up any of their top 3 prospects, and maybe in that was considered Emil Andrae. And maybe one, I think it's more plausible, Briere is saving these assets for a greater need at center, and we'll talk about that subsequent to this discussion. Dan?
Yeah, I think a few things on this. You know, as much a fan as I was, and I think some of you guys were, of David Jiricek when they could have drafted him, I do wonder, you know, I mean, the fact that Columbus was kind of ready to give up on him, I wonder what that says about the player behind the scenes, kind of like how is he in the locker room. It seems like he was pretty upset when they had to, you know, when they sent him down to the AHL. So I do have some questions on Jiricek, his mental makeup. He is really going to be kind of like a boom or bust type of player. I mean, he's physical. He's got a great shot from the point. But a lot of the other things sort of, it's unclear to me if they're going to come together. A lot of the prospect analysts who I respect either didn't even love him from the start, or they maybe loved him and now their opinion has changed a little bit. Defensemen have a longer runway for development. We're seeing that with Emil Andrae, but I think that there were some question marks about Jiricek and his character and that type of thing. I did hear that the Flyers were very interested in trying to get him. So I think that part of it probably, I think it's a two-part answer. I think part of it does have to do with Columbus was probably willing to take less from a team in the Western Conference than the East. I do think there's probably some truth to that, because the Flyers clearly could have matched a package like this. The other thing is that I do think that the Flyers are keenly aware that they have a much greater need for a center. And so I think that they are going to try and save up some of these assets for that, right? They've got 3 first-round picks this year. They've got their pick, which will probably be, you know, in the mid-teens. They've got the Edmonton pick and the Colorado pick, which will probably both be late first round. Then they've got 3 picks that are going to be early to mid second round picks. They've got Columbus's pick, they've got their own pick, and they've got Anaheim's pick. So I think that Briere does want to kind of like save those assets for sort of like the deal to get a center. But I think it also has something to do with, not the Columbus not wanting to trade the player out of town. And then I also think, or wanting to trade him to a Western Conference team. And then I do think there's some question marks now about Jiricek and like where he fits in. And the Flyers do have a lot of defensemen right now, right? I also wonder with Keith Jones's, how much Keith Jones sort of puts a premium on defensemen. I wonder if Keith Jones was here when the Flyers had to choose between Cutter and Jiricek. I wonder if they wouldn't have ended up with Jiricek in that spot. But that's just one of the things I was thinking about.
Yeah, interesting. Chef, go ahead.
So what I was going to say is, how much does Jonesy know everybody throughout the league and has inside track on everything before he became GM too? I think there was a lot of talk, because there was a lot of talk about Jiricek, and rightfully so. I think a lot of Flyers fans were like, we need to get on that wagon. We need to get, because if you look, it's split like halfway down. If you look at Twitter, half of them are happy, half of them are sad that they didn't get him or did get him. And, I think more so this. I think it was, they looked at it, went, all right, we'll give it a shot. If we can get him, and with this, I think they had their value. I think Briere had his value and said, and we're not going any higher than this. If you want them, this is it. We'll match that offer, whatever it is. But because they definitely, we could see the defense has been holding its own, even though it was a little bit of a rough start. There was definitely a lot better signs on the defense coming around faster than any of their offense. So I'll give them that. And then the goalie stabilized a little bit, and then the defense really tightened up in front of them. So I didn't look at that. I'm not sitting there going, they can get a defenseman. You can get a defenseman in a trade, and they have the assets to do it if they really want to. The hardest part now is going to be getting that big centerman, because, whether you listen to our podcast or whoever you're listening to, you're going to find that teams, you don't pry away like 6'2" dominating, 200-pound dominating centers. You don't pry them away from teams. You may get them at free agency, but they, teams like to lock them up and overpay them. And if you do, you're going to pay a king's ransom for it too. So I think Briere is ready to pay the king's ransom if he has to, if he can get the person he needs. I know, what was the name that was thrown out there a couple of times? I think Dylan Cousins.
Before you get into
Right.
that, I want to just kind of finish up with the Jiricek thing. Just remember the last time Don Waddell traded a young defensive prospect out of town, he was a general manager in Atlanta, and we ended up giving him Alexei Jitnik, and we got Braden Coburn. So I wonder if he's just, I don't want to do a Philly. No, but you never know. I mean, you don't forget stuff like that. It's almost, and it's not a Thornton deal or, Mike O'Connell or anything like that. But now I also think that the other part of this is, I think the fans want Briere to make a big move on the pro side so bad that rational discussions like the one we're having tonight are not going to satisfy their lust to get the big improvement that they've lacked. They didn't get it. They tried it with Fletcher, and it didn't work. Hextall never really made an effort. So there's a frustration. You have this dozen-year gap of nothing really that worked outside of Niskanen for one season, and he became like a god, right? So it was really crazy. So now the Flyers have a plethora of young defensemen of a certain ilk, a certain, status. And you're just wondering, is Bonk going to be, at the end of the day, as good as David Jiricek? Offensively, you would think not. Defensively, maybe. But one thing, Bonk is probably a lower maintenance player, a guy, given his background, his father's background. He's playing for a program that it's known for preparing players very well to play. in the NHL. And Jiricek has come off and a little bit like Kolosov, like a little bit of a malcontent, but you could also make the case that Jiricek was definitely mishandled by another regime, by Yarmo's regime. So can you blame the guy in that regard? So I don't think there's easy answers. So I think the question is, if you substitute Bonk in and the Flyers give up comparable value in first-round picks, are people comfortable with getting Jiricek, who is yet to show anything in a year and a half in, based on your original scouting reports and then the information that filtered in? I'm wondering, maybe Jody Shelley, a good buddy of an announcing buddy of Keith Jones, Dan, you were talking about that. Maybe he whispered in Dan, Jody Shelley's ear and say, hey, yeah, well, what do you think of this kid? And maybe Jody Shelley had an honest moment and said, he's got an attitude problem. I don't know. So I'm just trying to bring open the possibilities to fans that are listening to this, that are ticked off at what the Flyers did or didn't do, may not do, may never do, and we're waiting to. It's almost like we have to do a show and try to sell you on Daniel Briere, and we're not trying to do that. We're trying to be objective based on our experience. Dan,
Jiricek, I think Jiricek would have been a nice to have, but I don't think is a guy that you would have wanted to really broken the bank for, just because of, like you said, what we've got coming in the pipeline. Look, I'm still not convinced on Oliver Bonk either way. I think he might end up being a solid middle six defenseman. I don't know what his ultimate upside is either at this point. I think he benefits from playing on a absolutely stacked London Knights team. One thing I did want to mention, since we were talking about Bonk a little bit, is I don't know if you were going to bring this up later, Isaiah, but the World Junior Championship team, the Canadian team, has sort of announced their initial roster, and there are a number of Flyers who are on the roster. Oliver Bonk is on the roster. He will probably be on either their first or second pairing. Could quarterback the power play potentially, or maybe they'll put him, in the bumper where he is with London. But he's going to get a ton of minutes. He'll probably be a captain or an alternate captain on that team. From the forwards, Jetlachenko looks like he's going to be on that team. Will probably be something like a third-line center. And then Denver Barkey also looks like he's going to be on that team. And he's kind of like the perfect, fourth-line type of energy player for Team Canada. So those three guys, and then Carson Bjarnason, the goaltender, is having a better season for the Brandon Wheat Kings, and it looks like he'll be on the team. So it could be exciting that the Flyers could have four guys on that Team Canada World Juniors team. So that'll be something exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Shep, you were going to get into the trades. I did think it was a good idea at this point to introduce some of the information that Elliot Friedman talked about on his 32 Thoughts podcast, and a lot of stuff that's been out there. I think Pierre LeBrun was saying that the Flyers were the most active team on the phone in the entire league. And he's got a lot of irons in the fire. If you missed that, I'm trying to tweet and get a hold of all this stuff at the O&B Puckcast account on X at O&B Puck. And it's the same thing, Blue Sky. We're not as busy there. I want to be honest. X is basically our home for information, breaking and all that. I try to copy a lot of that on Blue Sky when I can for those that prefer that format. But we're talking about Jiricek, and we already discussed a lot of that stuff. But if you're talking about also some of the other trade information about who is an active team, they mentioned, I think Philly has been out there because, obviously they've got Frost out there. They may have some more players out there that are looking and that they're looking for a center. They're looking to change their mix a little bit, potentially. So, and then we have a Kevin Kurz talking about centers in another article this week. And while I disagree with one of the things he talked about in terms of players that the Flyers might be looking at, he mentioned players, and Shep, you mentioned Dylan Cousins, and there were a couple other players in that article, which of course I failed to link on my notes. So why don't you talk about some of those players that you were thinking about there?
The big one, the only one I thought that was going to be attainable, I guess, would be like Dylan Cousins. If you're looking, I know, who was it? Who was I listening to? We're also talking about it. I think it might have been Jason and Bill Meltzer. they were talking about it, and Bill said, "Oh yeah, I would be okay with him. I would be okay with them pursuing that." And like I said, it's going to be very hard to pry away. And I would ask my one question to this: Are you willing to bet your center future on Dylan Cousins right now? And probably give away a couple really good picks and Spectre too. And I don't know. I think you might be better off trying to orchestrate a free agent signing or maybe look to the draft to see. I mean, if you're gonna have to sell the farm, maybe target somebody that you really like that's in the farm system of another team and offer 2 number ones for it and see what happens, or something, and throw in some stuff and change. If you're going to pay the farm, you might as well get the player that you really, really want. And I don't know, for me, I don't see anybody on the market that seems to be available that I'd really want. The closest thing is the Cousins. And if it's reasonable, then I would go for it. But I wouldn't break the bank on it just because you're trying to make a move.
Well, I think I did finally uncover that, so I'm not as unprepared as I might have appeared to be a couple minutes ago. But Trevor Zegras was a guy. A lot of people are saying, "Oh, geez, a left wing." Marco Rossi from the Minnesota Wild. He's going to get moved. A lot of people believe they don't really understand why. Maybe he's not the biggest guy, but he's been fairly productive and he's having a good season with Minnesota. We talked about Dylan Cousins, Shane Pinto of the Ottawa Senators. He's one of the centers, and Josh Norris has been out, but Josh Norris has had 3 shoulder surgeries. Even though he's a really good player, has a real tough contract. He's a good player, but with that kind of injury history, it's the last thing the Flyers need, knowing that Sean Couturier could go down at any minute. And Kevin mentioned Brock Nelson as like an older solution, which I don't see the Flyers going in that direction at all, unless they were able to get him at a cut rate. Brock Nelson probably is going to be a trade deadline deal for a better team than the Flyers. But there are some names out there, particularly Dylan Cousins, Marco Rossi, and Shane Pinto would be 3 guys. And I think Cousins is gettable because Buffalo does have all of these center prospects. They have Zach Benson. They already have Tage Thompson. They have Peyton Krebs, who was rumored to be coming here. And they drafted Hellenius. They have Yuri Kulik, and they also have Noah Osland. I mean, it seems like it's tailor-made with what the Sabres want. They want scoring on the wing. Check that box. Flyers have guys who can score on the wing. And there's a surplus at center in the Buffalo organization. So those 2 would seem to be natural trading partners. Of course, I've said that on about 5 or 6 shows, and people are probably telling me to shut up already. We're tired of hearing it. But we did want to give you some realistic options for players that might be out there. And since Pierre LeBrun and Elliot Friedman are saying that the Flyers are active in some form or fashion and looking to change the mix, we're not blowing smoke, in the air there. Dan, any comments about some of those players or anything else?
Yeah, I'd be happy with any one of those 3 centers you mentioned. I was really hoping that they might end up with Marco Rossi. I guess that could still happen. I think he would be a great fit. He's a little smaller, but I think he's got a good engine on him. And it's just so tough because generally everyone's looking for top 6 centers. So to try and acquire one who's younger, you really do need to do your due diligence, and you're going to have to find guys in general there's some reason why they haven't clicked yet. And the other thing is that everyone in the league knows that the Flyers need top 6 centers. So they're, at a disadvantage there from a negotiation standpoint. I think Cousins is interesting. Buffalo, might be willing to part with him. Shane Pinto's interesting. The Flyers have been rumored to have interest in Josh Norris with the Senators, who I don't really have much interest in. I know he's had some injury issues.
Yeah, the 3 shoulder surgeries.
Yeah. Pinto, I think is very interesting. And he's a guy that I would, be potentially trying to target. I know the Flyers have a decent trading relationship with the Senators in the past, so that could be interesting. The Senators are a team that might have interest in like a Scott Lawton and/or a Ristolainen, something like that. So there could be some fits there. But yeah, all three of those guys are interesting. Flyers are going to get some good players in the draft also. It doesn't look like it's going to be the best draft, but to have all those picks where they have them should be good. So it'll be. I think they know they have to make a trade for a center, and I think they'll work something out. I don't necessarily think Briere is like. I don't think they're like desperate right now. I think they're willing to. I think they're doing the due diligence, and I think they're kind of willing to wait until something comes along. They do have a lot of assets they can depart with. It's not the end of the world if they have to wait till the offseason either to try and do it closer to the draft when teams are more interested in getting those picks.
Yeah, I think really is dependent upon like what we're going to get out of Frost and whether Couturier can hold up. The other guys really aren't doing much. And if you listen to Alex Appleyard, they're really being carried by a handful of guys. He put something out today. Couturier, TK, Michkov, York, Sanheim, and Andrae are the only 6 skaters that are over 50% expected goals for percentage. So everybody else is that TK, Michkov, Couturier, Sanheim, Brink, only 5 pacing for 40+ points. So there's still issues. And we talked last week about the underachieving wingers, with Farabee and Tippett and Forster, that great play to Brink in the Ranger game and kind of looking like the player from last year, notwithstanding Forster really has been underwhelming most of the year. Maybe he's waking up now, but.
Well, with Cousins, though, doesn't he carry I'm like looking at Puckpedia here, and it looks like he carries a 7.1 million contract. I mean, TK getting his raise next year?
Well, he had a 31 goal, 37 assist season in 23. He's 6'3", 200 pounds, and he is he's 23. So he's going to be 24 in February. I mean, that fits the profile of what the Flyers are looking for. I'm not familiar with that player, but they certainly like size, and he's a skilled guy. He's got 10 points in 24 games this year, and his at least his Corsi number is good. They're attempting more shots with him on the ice than against. So
I'm just talking about the math of it. You know what I mean? There's going to be a lot.
I mean, they'd have to let go of a guy like Farabee and plus, depending on
a lot more than that, too. So
but again, he only has 10 points in 24 games, so he hasn't come up to that level yet. But I mean, if the kind of player that the Flyers need, if he played up to that level, it would be a contract that they could live with, But it's a gamble, so you might want to be more conservative with somebody like Pinto, whose contract is not as onerous, but it just depends on their scouts and what they think would be a better player. So, I think that's where they're at. It is a little frustrating as a fan right now. 7.1 for Dylan Cousins through 2028, and for a second line
2030.
center,
it's 2030. He's signed through, I do believe.
Oh no, you're right. He's a UFA in 2030, right?
Yep.
I misread that. You are correct. Him and Tage are battling out to be the top player. So Tage has him edged out. So that's the situation with Buffalo. They got, like I said, though, they have a lot of inventory at that position. Let's see what happens. So I think we're going to call it. I think it's time for the last word. Chef, let me start with you. What's your final thoughts for tonight?
Final thoughts is this. Have fun with it for now. So I know we're talking about trade deadlines and big moves and all this stuff, but realistically, that's probably talk for after the new year when it really starts buckling down. Let's see how they are maybe 1 month from now, and then we'll see what's going on. Just enjoy it. I mean, finally, it's not boring hockey. It's actually fun and exciting hockey. You could say a lot of things about this team, but right now they're not boring, and that's the best thing about it. So, and hey, if you want to argue with me about some stuff out there, that's fine. You hit me up on Chef to Left B on X, Chef to Left B on X.
You got it. Dan, we got the Four Nations announcements coming up. We have the the World Juniors camps and possibility, like you mentioned, of some Flyers being named to those teams. Any other thoughts before we call it a night?
It's a shame, that Russia can't compete in these contests, right? I mean, it would have been nice to see Michkov play for Team Russia in the Four Nations. It would have been nice to see Zavragin play for Russia in the World Juniors. So it's a little disappointing. I love these tournaments, but it's a little disappointing that we don't get to see, Team Russia on this stage. Hopefully at some point that'll change. Who knows? But yeah, no, it's a great time of year for hockey. We've got, Flyers playing well. We've got these tournaments coming up. It harkens back to the days when the Flyers had 7 or 8 guys in the World Juniors, and I don't know how many they'll have this year, but having 4 on Team Canada is pretty impressive. So it's a fun time of year. The weather's getting colder. Hopefully, Flyers' schedule coming up is not all that difficult. So hopefully they can mine some more wins and play some more entertaining hockey as we head into this fun holiday season.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Flyers are off until Thursday. They host the world champion Florida Panthers, and then they're in Boston for a matinee, 1 p.m. on Saturday the 7th, and then they play the Utah Hockey Club back at the Wells Fargo Center on Sunday the 8th, and then we're going to see you next week. We have a special show. We don't want to announce anything yet because it's someone who has a very busy schedule, and we want to make sure we nail it down for you, but we think you'll be very happy if we can pull this off. So check out the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck on X, Blue Sky, like we mentioned earlier. We also post on Getter at O&B Puckcast, at O&B Puckcast. You can catch us on 12 podcast platforms: Apple, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Amazon Audible, Deezer, YouTube page. Just plug in there, O&B Puckcast. We're on Facebook as well. So if you could rate and subscribe, we'd really appreciate it. It helps move us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcasts. We do appreciate that. So with that said, until next time, everybody, thanks for listening tonight and take care.